As our protagonist and Ben stood before the grotesque sight of the zombie's grotesquely swollen stomach, the faces embedded within it twisted in agonizing despair, their mournful cries resonating through the air like a haunting dirge of lost souls. The atmosphere was charged with tension, a silent prelude to the chaos that was about to erupt. Suddenly, the abomination unleashed a bone-rattling roar that reverberated through the ground, charging at them with terrifying ferocity. Instinct kicked in. They dove aside just in time to avoid a titanic fist that slammed into the earth with a cataclysmic boom, sending chunks of concrete and debris flying like deadly shrapnel, cracking the pavement beneath them. Dust swirled in the air, thickening the hellish haze as Ben seized the moment. His machete glinted ominously in the dim light, and with a primal scream that echoed his rage, he swung it with all his might at the fat zombie's back. The blade sliced through putrid flesh, with a sickening squelch sinking deep into the creature's rotting body, drawing forth a torrent of dark, viscous fluid that sprayed like a grotesque fountain. The horrific sound elicited a shriek of pure, unbridled rage from the monster, a sound that reverberated like thunder. The zombie recoiled, its attention snapping toward them, fury igniting in its bloodshot, soulless eyes that seemed to burn with malevolence. Our protagonist felt adrenaline flood his veins, sharpening his senses as he drew his dagger, his grip steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. They stood united, ready to face this grotesque horror, believing in their strength as a 2-on-1 force against the nightmare before them. But just as they gathered their resolve, the monster grinned, a twisted, malevolent expression that sent icy fingers of dread crawling down their spines. With a grotesque motion, it reached down, tearing one of the faces from its repulsive belly, the skin dripping with foul, viscous fluid that pooled on the ground, creating a slick, nightmarish puddle. In a horrific display of malice, the zombie hurled the face at them, now transformed into a flaming skull that soared through the air like a projectile of doom, trailing embers and smoke. Instinctively, our protagonist sidestepped the infernal missile, feeling the blistering heat singe his skin as it whizzed past him. But Ben, consumed by the weight of the monstrous bulk before him, remained oblivious to the danger lurking behind. The flaming skull morphed mid-air, grotesquely twisting into a zombie wielding a baseball bat, landing with predatory grace mere feet from Ben. The air thickened with malice, a palpable tension suffocating their surroundings as the creature grinned wickedly, its eyes glinting with sadistic pleasure, ready to deliver a brutal strike. "Ben, behind you," our protagonist shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. But it was too late. The baseball-wielding zombie swung the bat with a vicious arc, connecting with a sickening crack that echoed through the air like a gunshot. Ben's face crumpled under the impact, blood erupting from his mouth in a vicious spray as his body was sent crashing backward, collapsing to the ground like a lifeless rag doll, unconscious and utterly vulnerable. A surge of raw primal panic coursed through our protagonist as he witnessed brutal fall, the sight igniting a firestorm of fury within him. The tide of battle had shifted dramatically, leaving him alone against the relentless onslaught. The big fat zombie roared triumphantly, its rancid breath filling the air, a predator savoring the sweet taste of impending victory. As the stench of decay mingled with the metallic tang of blood, a fierce rage ignited within him, burning hotter than any fear. He tightened his grip on the dagger, the blade gleaming with the promise of vengeance and survival. This was no longer just about his own life. It was a fight for Ben, who lay helpless against the cold, unyielding ground, and for the very essence of humanity that this monster sought to devour. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to falter. Channeling every ounce of fury and determination, he prepared to confront the nightmare looming before him. The air felt thick with the threat of death, but he would not back down. With a defiant roar of his own, he lunged forward, dagger poised to strike, ready to unleash a storm of violence upon the abomination that sought to consume them both. He surged forward, fueled by the primal instinct to protect, plunging the dagger deep into the creature's exposed side. The blade penetrated with brutal force, scraping against bone as he twisted it viciously, eliciting a horrific howl from the zombie. In a frenzy, he pulled the dagger free and slashed again, each movement fueled by a desperate fury, blood spraying as he carved into the rotting flesh. The big fat zombie reeled back, its eyes wide with shock and rage, but he pressed forward, relentless. He dodged a desperate swipe of its massive arm, feeling the rush of wind as it cut through the air beside him. With a fierce growl, he struck again, aiming for the throat, determined to silence the monster once and for all. The blade slid into the creature's neck, cutting through decayed tissue and sinew, and he felt the satisfying crunch as he severed the last threads of life binding the abomination to this world. With the creature collapsing in a grotesque heap, he turned to Ben, who lay still, the blood pooling around him. He knelt beside his friend, the adrenaline still coursing through him as he checked for any sign of life. The fight wasn't over yet, but he had survived the first wave of horror, and he would do everything in his power to ensure they both made it out alive. The battle had been brutal, but it was just the beginning of a fight for survival against the darkness that threatened to consume them. As our protagonist knelt beside Ben, desperation clawed at his throat. "Hey Ben, are you okay? Wake up." His voice trembled with urgency, but the only response he received was a haunting silence, punctuated by the ominous creaking of the big fat zombie, which was standing once again. Its grotesque face hung limply, tethered by threads of decaying flesh, swaying back and forth as if it would fall off at any moment. The sight was enough to turn his stomach. His heart raced, confusion flooding his mind. How could it still be alive? He had severed its head, or so he thought. But as he looked closer, horror washed over him. The zombie's right hand reached up and grabbed its own head, which was barely hanging on. With a sickening crack, it ripped the head off with a sickening squelch, tossing it aside like a piece of rotting fruit. In its place, a new head grotesquely sprouted, bulbous and dripping with a thick, foul ichor that pooled around its neck. Now, instead of 13 faces embedded in its stomach, there were only 12, a grim reminder of the monster's insatiable regeneration. "Come on, Ben, wake up," our protagonist shouted, shaking his friend more vigorously, but Ben remained unresponsive, his body limp and fragile against the backdrop of chaos. Panic surged within him, each second stretching into eternity as he realized the danger looming. The fat zombie, unfazed by the chaos surrounding it, began to grab the faces embedded within its stomach, one by one, each removal accompanied by a grotesque squelching sound that echoed through the air like the death knell of hope. With each face it discarded, a new horror emerged, their eyes wide with predatory hunger. The air thickened with an overwhelming sense of dread as, one by one, the faces transformed into separate, fully formed zombies, each armed and eager to join the fray. 13 zombies now filled the room, each brandishing different weapons, rusty knives that glinted menacingly, baseball bats dripping with putrid ooze, and a chainsaw that buzzed ominously, its teeth glistening with remnants of their previous victims. Panic surged through our protagonist like wildfire. He had to protect Ben, he had to act, and he had to act. Just as he was about to shake Ben awake again, one of the newly formed zombies, a hulking brute with a twisted grin, yanked out a missile launcher from its grotesque frame, its intentions clear and terrifying. The air crackled with tension as it aimed the weapon directly at Ben, who lay helpless on the ground. "No," our protagonist screamed, instinct kicking in. Without a second thought, he kicked Ben out of the way, sending him rolling just as the missile launched from the zombie's weapon, streaking through the air with a deafening roar that drowned out all other sounds. The explosion that followed was catastrophic. The missile struck the ground with a thunderous impact, unleashing a massive fireball that engulfed the area in a hellish blaze. The shockwave radiated outward, shaking the very foundations of the room and sending debris flying like deadly shrapnel. The ground trembled beneath him as chunks of concrete and splintered wood rained down, leaving a gaping hole in the floor, a testament to the chaos that had erupted. The force of the blast hurled our protagonist backward, knocking the wind out of him as he crashed against the cold, unforgiving ground. As he blinked through the smoke and debris, the world around him morphed into a hellscape. the air thick with the acrid scent of burning flesh and the metallic tang of blood. The ominous sounds of the remaining zombies regrouping filled the air, their guttural growls and cackles shifting focus toward him, their predatory instincts honed in on their next target. With Ben still incapacitated and the odds stacked against him, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline mix with a suffocating fear. The time for hesitation had passed. With a primal roar, he clutched his dagger, its blade glinting ominously in the dim light, ready to face the horde of horrors that had risen before him. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a fight to save his friend and reclaim their lives from the clutches of death. As the dust settled around him, he took a deep breath, channeling his fear into fierce determination. He could feel the weight of the past few moments pressing down on him, but he pushed it aside, focusing only on the grotesque figures advancing toward him. The tide of violence surged within him, and with every ounce of strength he possessed, he prepared to unleash a storm of brutality against the undead monstrosities, threatening to consume them both. With a fierce shout, he lunged forward, dagger poised to strike, ready to carve his way through the nightmare that loomed before him. Each step he took was fueled by the desperate need to protect Ben, to reclaim hope amidst the chaos, and to confront the relentless darkness that sought to extinguish their lives. The battle had begun, and he was determined to fight until his last breath. Our protagonist collided with the 12 zombies in a brutal frenzy, a chaotic clash of survival as he wielded his weapon with fierce determination. The air was thick with the stench of decay and desperation, a nauseating miasma that hung heavy as he dodged their clumsy strikes, using their momentum against them. He maneuvered with deadly precision, smashing their heads against the cold, unforgiving walls of the decaying building. The sickening crunch of bone echoed in the air, each impact sending shards of rotting flesh splattering across the floor, mingling with the warm, viscous blood that painted the ground beneath their feet. As the fight raged on, fatigue began to gnaw at him, his muscles burning with exertion. The relentless tide of zombies pressed in, clawing and biting, their grotesque forms a nightmarish blur. They cut, punched, and kicked with insatiable hunger, their dead eyes glinting with malicious intent. Each strike felt like a reminder that he was outnumbered, and the exhaustion weighed heavily on him, each attack becoming harder to evade as the zombies grew more aggressive, their frenzied movements a cacophony of growls, snarls, and the horrible sounds of flesh tearing. Every 2 minutes, the hulking zombie with the missile launcher reloaded its weapon with mechanical precision, an ominous reminder of the looming danger. The sound of the missile priming sent a chill down his spine. He managed to dodge the initial blast, but the explosion sent shockwaves through the air, rattling his bones and leaving him gasping for breath. The searing heat of the blast singed his skin, a constant reminder that he was fighting against time and an overwhelming force that could obliterate him in an instant. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to our protagonist, the main fat zombie had its sights set on Ben. The grotesque creature, a mass of putrid flesh and festering sores, lifted him effortlessly, preparing to engulf him as his legs began to sink into its rancid stomach. Ben's heart raced as he regained consciousness, his mind struggling to comprehend the horror unfolding around him. Panic surged through him as he realized his predicament. He was being consumed by the very monster he had fought against. With a primal scream, he grasped his machete tightly in one hand, desperately swinging it at the creature's flesh, hoping to sever the connection that threatened to pull him into the abyss. But the fat zombie was relentless. It snatched Ben's hands, its grip like iron crushing his wrists as it delivered a brutal punch to his face. Pain exploded in Ben's skull, sending stars dancing in his vision as he reeled from the impact. He was trapped in a nightmare, struggling against the overwhelming force of the creature, its rancid breath washing over him like a wave of decay. Each attempt to fight back was met with brutal retaliation, the fat zombie's monstrous body pressing down on him, threatening to swallow him whole. The squelching sounds of its grotesque body and the stench of bile and rot filled his nostrils, making him gag as he fought to breathe. Back in the fray, our protagonist fought valiantly against the onslaught of zombies, his dagger a blur as he struck out with deadly precision. He felt the weight of desperation driving him, each swing fueled by the knowledge that Ben was in peril. But the tide of the battle was turning. He could feel the relentless pressure of the undead closing in, their moans and growls rising to a deafening crescendo. With every zombie he dispatched, another took its place, their numbers seemingly endless. He ducked beneath a wildly swinging arm, using the momentum of the zombie to shove it into its companion, sending them both crashing against the wall. The sickening sound of cracking skulls reverberated in his ears, and he reveled in the chaos, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But just as he thought he had gained the upper hand, a zombie lunged from the side, its jagged teeth sinking into his shoulder. Pain erupted as he felt the warm blood seep from the wound, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. Just then, the hulking zombie with the missile launcher fired again. The missile streaked through the air like a harbinger of doom, and he barely managed to roll out of the way. The explosion erupted behind him, debris raining down as the ground shook violently. He felt the shockwave slam into him, sending him sprawling forward into the throng of zombies, knocking a few off their feet. He scrambled to regain his footing, the sharp pain radiating through his body a reminder of his mortality. Through the haze of battle, he caught a glimpse of Ben's struggle against the fat zombie. The sight ignited a fire within him, a fierce determination to save his friend from the clutches of this grotesque creature. With renewed vigor, he surged forward, carving a bloody path through the remaining zombies, his dagger flashing like a beacon of hope in the nightmarish chaos. Each swing of his weapon was fueled by desperation. He slashed open a zombie's throat, the blade slicing through decayed flesh, and watched as its lifeblood sprayed out in a gory arc, drenching him in warm, sticky gore. But the zombies were relentless, and he found himself surrounded, their rotting hands grasping at him, pulling him into their decaying embrace. He felt the weight of their bodies, the suffocating stench of death closing in on him. He gasped, his heart racing as he struggled against the tide of undead, fighting for every inch of space. "I will not die here," he shouted, his voice raw with defiance, echoing through the chaotic fray as he pushed back against the overwhelming dread. With each desperate movement, he fought through the throng, using his dagger to carve a path through the undead. He lunged at the hulking zombie with the missile launcher, determined to end its reign of terror. But just as he thought he had a moment of respite, another zombie lunged at him, sinking its teeth into his forearm. He screamed, the pain igniting a primal fury within him. With a savage twist, he pulled his dagger free and plunged it into the creature's skull, the blade piercing through with a sickening squelch. As he fought for his life, he felt the exhaustion weigh heavily on him, but the thought of Ben kept him going, fueling his resolve. He could see Ben struggling against the fat zombie, the creature's grip tightening around him. "Hold on, Ben," he bellowed, his heart racing. "I'm coming." He lunged at the fat zombie, his dagger poised for the kill, ready to sever the connection that threatened to pull Ben into the abyss of horror. As he approached, he placed his foot against the grotesque face of the fat zombie, pushing with all his might, using it as leverage to wrench Ben free. The creature howled in agony, its rancid breath washing over him as he twisted the dagger deep into its side, feeling the blade sink into the rancid mass of putrid flesh. Blood gushed from the wound, spraying across the floor and drenching them both in the thick, viscous liquid. The fat zombie thrashed, its grip on Ben loosening as it howled in pain. But just as he thought salvation was within reach, another zombie lunged at him, its arms flailing wildly, and in the heat of the moment, he swung his dagger to cut it down. The blade met resistance, and with a sickening snap, the dagger broke mid-cut, leaving him with nothing but a jagged remnant of his weapon. Panic surged through him as he stumbled back, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "No, not now," he cursed, feeling the weight of despair threatening to drag him down as the undead closed in around him. "I will not die here," he roared again, the words a mantra of defiance as he fought to regain his footing. With sheer determination, he kicked the broken blade aside, refocusing his energy on Ben, knowing that together they would find a way to survive this nightmare. The battle was far from over, but he could feel the tide turning, their lives hanging in the balance as he readied himself for the next wave of horror, fueled by an unwavering resolve to reclaim their lives from the jaws of death. As our protagonist and Ben stood panting, their eyes locked onto the grotesque form of the fat zombie, a palpable tension filled the air. The creature's rage was tangible, its beady eyes glinting with fury as it surveyed the carnage wrought by our protagonist's hand. The lifeless bodies of its once animated puppets lay scattered around, their decayed forms a testament to the brutal battle that had unfolded. But it wasn't just the loss of its minions that enraged the fat zombie. It was the fact that it couldn't claim Ben as its own. With a deafening roar that echoed through the decaying building, the fat zombie's rage erupted. A horrific transformation began to take place as tentacles, grotesquely pulsating and glistening with foul ichor, sprouted from its back. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The appendages writhed in the air like serpents seeking prey. Our protagonist and Ben exchanged bewildered glances, their minds racing to comprehend the unfathomable horror unfolding before them. Without warning, the tentacles lashed out, snaking toward the corpses of the fallen zombies strewn across the floor. The dead bodies began to twitch and convulse, animated by the fat zombie's dark power as they were pulled, lifeless and limp, toward the monstrous figure. The ground trembled beneath them as the fat zombie absorbed its fallen minions, merging with their decayed flesh. A grotesque amalgamation of muscle and sinew began to form, the creature transforming into a hulking mass of brutality. "What the hell is happening?" Ben gasped, his voice trembling with fear as they watched the horrifying spectacle unfold. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," our protagonist shouted, his instinct screaming at him to flee as the fat zombie's form grew larger and more menacing, muscles rippling beneath its skin as it became a nightmarish titan. The tentacles writhed violently, and with each passing moment the creature became more formidable. It roared again, a sound that reverberated through the building, shaking the very foundations. The once familiar space now felt like a nightmare come to life as the muscular zombie slammed its fists into the ground with enough force to send shockwaves rippling through the floor. The floor cracked and splintered, the sound echoing like thunder as the structure began to give way. Dust and debris rained down from above as the third floor trembled, threatening to collapse under the weight of the monstrous transformation. The walls of the building groaned in protest, and with a final bone-shaking impact, the floor gave in, sending them plummeting downward. "Hold on," our protagonist yelled, instinctively grabbing Ben's arm as the ground dropped out from beneath them. They fell, the world around them a blur of chaos and destruction as they were engulfed in darkness. As they descended into the void, he felt the ground slam against them, a harsh and unforgiving end to their descent. They landed hard on a lower floor, the impact jarring them to their bones, and the dust settled around them like a shroud. He groaned, pushing himself up and looking around, disoriented but alive. "Ben, are you okay?" he shouted, his heart racing as he searched for his friend amidst the rubble and debris. "I'm fine, just a little shaken," Ben replied, his voice strained but intact. He struggled to his feet, and they both quickly assessed their surroundings. But their relief was short-lived as the sound of the fat zombie's furious roars echoed through the crumbling building, reverberating like a death knell. The muscular zombie was now a force to be reckoned with, its form towering over them as it broke through the wreckage of the collapsed floor, its tentacles still writhing and thrashing in a frenzy. "Get ready," our protagonist shouted, adrenaline surging through him once more. He could feel the weight of despair creeping in, but it was quickly replaced by an unwavering resolve. They had to fight, had to find a way to survive against this monstrous abomination that had transformed from a grotesque creature into a formidable predator. "Together," Ben yelled, gripping his machete tightly, determination etched on his face. They steeled themselves as the monstrous fat zombie loomed closer, ready to unleash its fury upon them. With a guttural roar, the fat zombie lunged forward, its tentacles flailing wildly, seeking to ensnare them. One of the appendages lashed out, slamming into the ground where our protagonist had stood just moments before, creating a crater that sent debris flying in all directions. The force of the impact rattled the walls, sending a cascade of dust and shattered fragments raining down around them. "Move," our protagonist shouted, narrowly dodging another strike as the tentacle whipped past him with a wet, slapping sound. He grabbed a broken pipe from the debris and swung it at the nearest tentacle, the metal colliding with a sickening thud. Black ichor splattered across his face and the tentacle recoiled, thrashing in pain. Ben, seizing the opportunity, charged forward with his machete, aiming for the creature's core. "Let's finish this," he yelled, adrenaline fueling his every move. He slashed at the fat zombie's exposed flesh, but it was like cutting through thick leather. The blade barely penetrated. The creature howled undeterred and swung its massive fists down at Ben, who barely managed to roll out of the way just in time. Realizing they needed a new strategy, our protagonist glanced around for anything they could use. He spotted a rusted, jagged piece of metal protruding from the rubble. "Ben, over here, we need to use the environment," he shouted, sprinting toward it. The muscular zombie, enraged by their defiance, lashed out again, the tentacles striking like vipers as they sought to ensnare them. One tentacle wrapped around Ben's leg, lifting him off the ground. He gasped, struggling against the viscous grip as panic surged through him. "No," our protagonist screamed, rushing forward. With all his strength, he hurled the metal shard at the tentacle, piercing it and causing it to release its hold. Ben fell to the ground, rolling away just in time as the tentacle thrashed wildly, spraying ichor across the floor. "Thanks," Ben gasped, regaining his footing. "Now let's take this bastard down." Fueled by desperation and fury, they attacked in unison. Our protagonist swung the broken pipe with all his might, targeting the creature's legs to weaken its stance. Each blow landed with a sickening crunch, the sound of metal against muscle echoing in the chaos. Ben followed up with precise slashes of his machete, aiming for the creature's exposed flesh, blood spraying in arcs as they worked together, a dance of survival against overwhelming odds. But the fat zombie was relentless. It retaliated, swinging its massive fists with terrifying force. One blow struck our protagonist squarely in the chest, launching him backward into a wall. Pain exploded in his lungs as he gasped for breath, but he refused to succumb to despair. "I will not die here," he roared, pulling himself to his feet, determination igniting a fire within him. He could feel the weight of despair creeping in, but it was quickly replaced by his unwavering resolve to protect Ben and reclaim their lives from this nightmare. Reinvigorated, he charged back into the fray, rallying beside Ben once more. They fought like cornered animals, each strike a desperate attempt to survive. The fat zombie howled in pain and rage, its tentacles thrashing as it struggled to regain control. In a final desperate gambit, Ben swung his machete low, slicing through one of the fat zombie's legs, while our protagonist followed up with a brutal swing of the metal pipe to its head. The creature staggered, its form wobbling precariously as it howled in agony. As it fell, the ground beneath them shuddered, and they knew they had to finish this. With a primal roar, they plunged their weapons into the creature, determined to end its reign of terror once and for all. This was their moment of reckoning, and they would face the horrors together, side by side, refusing to back down. As our protagonist and Ben stood ready to deliver the final blow to the muscular zombie, the atmosphere crackled with tension, a thick, oppressive weight bearing down on them. Just as they prepared for victory, the muscular zombie let out a guttural roar, halting their movement. "Stop," it bellowed, its eyes wild and frenzied. Without warning, it thrust its grotesque hand deep into its own mouth, pulling out a pulsating red crystal that shimmered ominously. "What the hell is it doing?" Ben whispered, dread pooling in the pit of his stomach. The muscular zombie lifted the crystal high, a maniacal grin spreading across its decaying features. "You think you can defeat me? Watch what true power looks like." With a violent motion, it crushed the crystal in its gnarled hand, unleashing a shock wave of energy that rippled through the air. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A cacophony of growls erupted from the shadows, and zombies began to pour forth from every corner like a relentless tide, their eyes glowing with hunger and malice. The overwhelming sound of their approach sent shivers down our protagonist's spine. "Damn it," he yelled, heart racing as he realized the sheer number of undead closing in. Just then a familiar voice chimed in his mind, his system, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. "Warning, hostile entities detected. You have 287 white crystals available. Combine them to create a lifetime weapon." "Now," he shouted back, voice strained with urgency. "In the middle of this madness." "Affirmative. Combine crystals now for optimal survival," the system insisted, its tone unyielding. With no other option, our protagonist nodded, determination hardening in his chest. "All right, let's do this." He focused, envisioning the energy of the white crystals swirling around him. He could feel their latent power, the potential for something extraordinary. In a brilliant flash of light, 2 iron hands materialized, encasing his arms in a powerful grip. The hands radiated heat, a molten glow that suggested both strength and ferocity. "Your life weapon is called Hand of Fire," the system announced. "This weapon grants enhanced strength and the ability to unleash fiery blasts upon command." "Perfect," our protagonist yelled, flexing the fiery hands as they adjusted to his movements. The power surged through him, igniting every fiber of his being as he prepared for battle. "Let's take them down," Ben shouted, gripping his sword tightly, ready to join the fray. With a primal roar, our protagonist charged into the horde, the Hand of Fire glowing menacingly. He swung his fists with ferocity, each punch landing with a sickening thud as flames erupted on contact, incinerating the zombies that dared come close. He slammed one creature's head into the ground, unleashing a fiery blast that turned it to ash, the heat scorching the air around him. "Burn, you monsters," he cried out, reveling in the power coursing through him. He unleashed fireballs at distant zombies, each explosion sending limbs and decayed flesh flying, creating a path of destruction as he fought alongside Ben. Ben was a whirlwind of steel, his sword slicing through the undead with precision. "Watch my back," he shouted as he spun around, cleaving through a group of zombies lunging at him. The 2 of them danced around one another, a deadly ballet of survival amidst the chaos. But the muscular zombie had summoned every undead creature in the city. No matter how many they dispatched, more zombies seemed to emerge from the shadows, the sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the sounds of the undead echoed ominously in their ears. "Stay focused," our protagonist yelled, summoning a wave of fire that spread across a cluster of zombies, igniting them in a furious blaze. "We need to take out that muscular zombie if we want to stop this, right?" Ben agreed, determination flashing in his eyes as he slashed through another wave of undead. They pushed their way through the throng, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws, the heat of the Hand of Fire illuminating their path as they fought their way closer to the monstrous figure. With every swing of the Hand of Fire, our protagonist felt an exhilarating rush, as if the weapon had awakened an inner strength he never knew he possessed. He unleashed fiery blasts, launching them at the muscular zombie, each explosion resonating with fury. The flames engulfed the undead surrounding them, but the muscular zombie remained a looming threat, watching them with a twisted grin. "Keep moving," he shouted, launching another fireball that exploded against a horde of zombies, the flames scorching them to dust. "We can't let it escape." The muscular zombie howled in anger, its tentacles thrashing wildly as it retaliated against the 2 of them. "You think you can defeat me? I am unstoppable," it roared, sending a wave of zombies crashing toward them. "Let's end this," our protagonist shouted, channeling all his energy into a massive punch that sent a shockwave of fire crashing into the muscular zombie. The explosion ignited the surrounding undead, but the muscular zombie was not finished. It surged forward, tentacles whipping through the air. "Stand strong," Ben yelled, charging alongside him as they fought back against the overwhelming tide. With every swing of their weapons, they carved a path through the horde, refusing to back down. But the onslaught was relentless, and our protagonist knew they couldn't waste any more time. He needed to cut through the horde and reach the muscular zombie directly. "I'll take care of the big one. Keep them off me," he shouted to Ben, leaving his friend to fend off the endless waves of zombies. Our protagonist pushed forward, the flames of the hand of fire blazing bright as he charged toward the muscular zombie. The heat radiated off him, igniting the air, but the undead closed in like a suffocating fog. He fought his way through the throng, the fiery punches incinerating everything in his path, but he had to focus on the muscular zombie that loomed ahead. Once he reached the creature, he made his right hand blaze with an intense fire, preparing for a devastating punch aimed directly at the muscular zombie's face. With a roar that echoed in the chaos, he swung his fiery fist, the flames roaring with power. But as the punch connected, shock coursed through him. The muscular zombie barely flinched, the fire seemingly absorbed by its grotesque form. "Is that all you've got?" it taunted, a sinister laugh rumbling from its throat as it retaliated with a vicious swipe of its tentacle. "Damn it," our protagonist cursed, staggering back. The realization hit him like a freight train. His fire alone wasn't enough to take down this beast. He needed to escalate the attack, to push beyond the limits of his powers. In a moment of desperation, he drew upon the fire within him, gathering the energy and mashing it together, condensing it into a dense, seething mass. He could feel the heat building, a fusion of his fiery essence, ready to unleash a cataclysmic force. "Let's see how you handle this," he yelled, unleashing the concentrated fire into a massive beam that surged toward the muscular zombie. The beam shot forth, illuminating the darkened room as it tore through the air with an ear-splitting roar, incinerating everything in its path. The beam struck the muscular zombie with the force of 1,000 suns, exploding in a blinding flash of light. The air crackled with energy as the blast engulfed the creature, the flames swirling around it in a chaotic dance of destruction. The heat radiated outward, searing the surrounding zombies and sending them flying as the blast tore a path of annihilation. "Now," he shouted, adrenaline coursing through him as he watched the muscular zombie struggle against the inferno. He felt the tide of battle shifting, the flames finally overwhelming the creature as it howled in rage and pain. With renewed determination, he pressed the attack, knowing that together with Ben, they could turn the tide against this monstrous threat. The battle raged on, a brutal symphony of chaos and destruction, but our protagonist was resolute. He would not back down. With the hand of fire at his side, he would reclaim their lives from the monstrous horde and emerge victorious, no matter what it took. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content like this. Don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Thank you so much again.